the sexual ideology that the libs are promoting ultimately is incoherent. And you can see this especially in a story from the New York Post, just came out a few days ago. I'm in a relationship with my 1998 Chevy, and our sex life is so special. That is the headline of it. I think, do we have some B-roll of this relationship? Yeah, so this is sort of, I almost feel bad even playing this. It's a guy just kissing his car and lying underneath his car and doing all sorts of creepy things with his car. Says he's 37 years old. He came out about 10 years ago as being in love with his car. And all right, that's enough beer. I don't need to see him kiss his car anymore. That's fine. I'm sorry I asked. I'm sorry. I asked. It was my fault, but I'm sorry I asked. He was on this show, TLC's My Strange Addiction. And it went viral at the time, and now 10 years later, he says, I'm still in love with my car. I got a feel for my automobile. I like to lean over his fender and across his hood and kind of press up against him. Okay, you get the idea. And he says that he does all the sorts of things with his car that married people do with one another. The sexual revolutionaries are going to laugh at this. They're going to say, "Oh, come on! This is what? Or how dare you? You're comparing all of our kind of bizarre sexual eccentricities, like drag shows for kids. You're comparing it to this wacko guy who's got objectophilia, is apparently the medical term for it, and he's in love with his car. It's completely incomparable." Sure. Now, when we conservatives have been accused of suggesting a slippery slope in years past, it's taken about 6 months to at most 5 or 6 years before we are at that point on the slippery slope. We get to that slippery slope pretty quickly. But actually, the guy in love with his car poses a much bigger question for the sexual revolutionaries than, say, people warning about pedophilia. Remember, during the sexual revolution, there were conservatives who were warning, if you normalize certain errant and deviant sexual behaviors, pretty soon people are going to try to normalize pedophilia. And the libs said, that's not true, that's ridiculous, that'll never happen. And what are they doing? They're obviously normalizing pedophilia right now. You can see it on tape. And you can hear them make the arguments. There was that professor who was fired from Old Dominion College for trying to normalize pedophilia. And then the professor just got hired by Johns Hopkins, I believe, by a technically even more prestigious university. So they are normalizing this. But they'll say, well, look, they might, if we normalize deviant sexual behaviors, pretty soon some people will be trying to normalize bestiality. And that's true. That's been less common than the people trying to normalize pedos. But you have seen pockets of that. But this is this actually is a bigger problem, because the sexual revolutionaries can say, look, we support the whole acronym and having, giant monkeypox orgies and, thruples and quadruples and quintuples and all. They can say we support all that stuff because it's all consensual. Consent is the key here. And a child cannot consent. Now, the libs are weakening on this already. They're saying, no, not only can a child consent to sex, but a child can consent to making permanent sexual decisions like lopping off parts of his body. So they're already weakening on that. But in theory, they could make that argument. Or they could say, look, an animal cannot consent. This is why it's wrong to sleep with animals, is if that you're violating their consent and that's wrong. But then my question is, what about the Chevy? What about the 1998 Chevy? The 1998 Chevy doesn't have will, doesn't have freedom of choice, is not a conscious being, to my knowledge. It's just an old car. So if this guy wants to do all sorts of creepy things and say love is love and respect our love with his car, what's wrong with that? We all know that this is extremely disordered and wrong and should be discouraged, and this guy should seek help and not be celebrated for doing these sorts of things with his car. We all know that. But why? Why? Conservatives can answer why. Christians, Jews, Muslims, people with a traditional, even somewhat traditional religious sense and moral sense can tell you why. Because they'll say, well, that body part of yours is not meant for that muffler. That's not actually, men and women are complementary and they go together and they get married and they create children, and it's wrong and you shouldn't do that thing that you're doing underneath the car, and that's just intrinsically wrong and it's disordered and it's contrary to the natural law. And we can explain why it's wrong. But if your only criterion for sexual ethics is consent, and if it feels good, do it, then you can't say this is wrong. And I bet you if you talk to the real radicals out there on the sexual revolutionary side and you said, hey, what do you think about the guy who's in a relationship with his 98 Chevy? They would say, well, if he likes it, whatever. It's not hurting anybody. Who cares? It's fine. Let him do it. That's okay. Yeah, that's not my thing, but that's fine. That is a real divide. I don't think that we as a society should encourage that. I don't think that this guy has any right to do those sorts of things with his car. I don't think that this is some sacred natural. I don't think love is love. I don't think that the guy's relationship with his car is something admirable that we should encourage. And so if we're now at that position where we're saying, actually, some things are wrong, then and only then can we crawl back to the hey, maybe the kids should not be at the drag show putting dollar bills in the G-strings of these weirdos. Then and only then can we get back to, hey, maybe you shouldn't be pumping 7-year-olds full of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones potentially. Then and only then can we get back to some semblance of, hey, maybe marriage has a meaning. When we say marriage has a meaning, by the way, we're not saying that we should be really cruel to people who have different sexual desires. We should just beat these guys up. We should oppress them. We should run them out of. No one's saying that. We're saying that there is reality, that there is such a thing as marriage, and marriage has a meaning no matter what the radicals want to pretend the meaning is. I can say that this leftist tears tumbler is a chainsaw, and I can even force everyone around me to call it a chainsaw, but it's not a chainsaw because reality has some say here. It's a leftist tears tumbler, and the point of it is to drink delicious leftist tears. I'm glad you liked that clip. Now, ding, ring, slam, like, subscribe, ping, I don't know, whatever you gotta do. Subscribe, get the notifications to the Michael Knowles Show. Head on over also to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you get your audio podcasts. Subscribe there, leave a 5-star review, please. We will see you next time.